It's Karen here, Kazina, and this is part 2 of the comic collection that I was showing you in part 1. I've changed the batteries in my camera, so without any further ado, I say that a lot, don't I? I've noticed that. Anyway, I'm going to just show you the rest of the comics that I was going to show you in part 1, but now there's part 2 because of my batteries. Anyway, turning the camera around, and next one I'm going to show you is another #1 edition of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and this was by Mirage. A lovely artwork on the front of that, I must admit. Gosh, staring at it too long. Next one is a #1 edition of Batman Adventures. This is actually based on the Fox TV show, and so it's a nice cartoony look about it. I did like that old look of Batman years ago. The next one is a first edition of Cage, Luke Cage, Power Man. Now this is obviously not old Luke Cage, but this is new Luke Cage, and I loved Luke Cage years ago when he used to have his little yellow top on, and he used to team up with Iron Fist. And I've actually got, again, I've got quite a few of those up in the attic, but this is a #1 edition when they decided, let's have a bit more Luke Cage. I've got Moon Knight #13, and this is where he fights Daredevil. They were not the best of friends. This is another one that was bought out again. This is a first edition of Hellstrom. He used to, oh gosh, I'm trying to think now. Damien Hellstrom, was he called? He was out before, but they decided to revamp it, but I don't think it was any great shapes when they revamped it. I much preferred Hellstrom of old. A Beyond the Unknown #4, and this is a sci-fi magazine. Nice little Martians on the front. I always like those mystery and sci-fi story comics. I used to have loads of them. Again, I don't own a lot of them now because I traded them all in over the years, but I do still have a few, and that's one of them. I've got a first edition of Mr. T and the T-Force, and it's another one that's sealed, that's not been opened, and hey, I used to have some love for Mr. T. I liked Mr. T, and I know he doesn't really, do well in comic books, but I thought he was a cool dude back then. I loved him, all that "what you looking at, fool," and "I ain't getting in no plane." So big up the Mr. T, says I. A Superboy comic. This is quite an old one, #116. I don't know how old this is, but I imagine that this is probably around 1970 or thereabouts. And then I've got the very first edition of Spider-Woman, which I believe this is quite a rare-ish comic these days. I think this goes for about 25 quid now, and this actually does have her origin in this. I think she gets injected by her dad, who's trying to save her from radiation poisoning or something like that, and anyway she becomes Spider-Woman. I've got the first first edition of Star Trek, the motion picture. It's okay. I remember reading this, and the artwork inside unfortunately isn't great, but it's nice to have this. I grew up with the original Star Trek, so I'm not going to knock it. I've got the comic book adaptation of the film Catwoman, and I actually own the DVD, and I know it's not any great shakes, and I think that the best thing about the film I can say is I like the way she walked. She walked like how I think Catwoman would walk in my head. But it's actually not a bad comic book, and the artwork's quite nice. I've got a giant Justice League America. I always liked my big groups of superheroes, and I do have a certain love for the Justice League of America. There's Flash on the front. I liked Flash. So again, I've got quite a few of these up in the attic. There's one here called Darkness Falls, and this is by Dark Horse, and this is just one story. It's about the tragic life of Matilda Dixon, and it actually tells about this poor old dear that I think everyone thought she was a witch, and she gets killed in the end, and it's all very sad, but it was done really well. And I remember I've read this a few times, and I actually found this quite touching for a comic. I've got a #1 of Venom the Hunger, quite nice cover that is actually, and I've got a comic here of Xena, The Way of Death. I love Xena. I absolutely adore Xena, so I'm going to say nothing else about that because I just love Xena. I've got a #1 of Xena, and it's Dark Xena as opposed to Light Xena. Anyway, sorry, I'm babbling. And I've also got another one. It's the actual first annual of Xena. So, and funny enough, I'll go back to that. Look at the guy she's fighting. Doesn't he look? He looks a bit like Predator, doesn't he? He's got that kind of faux sort of dreadlocks coming out the back of his head. Anyway, I digress. I've got the first edition of Kung Fu Fighter, which I don't really know much about. To be honest, I just know that I've got it, and I'm looking at it right now. So that's all I can say. I've got a #135 of House of Secrets. Again, as I said earlier, I did like those. I used to love these type of comics, you know, the mystery ones and such like, that had little short stories. I used to, when I was sort of in my teens, I used to love reading them. I've got a old cartoony type comic called Spooky. According to this, he's a tough little ghost. Very American cartoony, isn't it? Next one is a #1 of the Alien Legion. Again, I don't remember this very well, so I can't really comment on it. And then I've got a few annuals that I do actually keep down here as opposed to up in the attic, and this one is Superman and Batman, and it's got Robin the Boy Wonder, which I wish it didn't, because I don't have much love for Robin, I have to say. He's never been my cup of tea, but anyway, this is an annual, and I don't know how old this is actually. But it looks like it's 70s. So I've got a Star Trek annual, which very kindly says 1972 right on the front, so I don't have to struggle. And it's basically, all it is in it is it's just like a whole big comic in an annual. There's actually no features in it like in some annuals that you get. It's just pure Star Trek comic. And then I've got an annual of the Avengers. Now, I have a lot of love for the Avengers. I was a big fan of the original Avengers, and I particularly was a big fan of the Emma Peel black and white series. And this, oh my hallowed annual, I'm getting excited, but this is actually of that this annual came out of that time, so Happy Me. I love Diana Rigg. She's great. She just so suited being Emma Peel. She was just so feline, and she really was a great foil to Steed, wasn't she? Well, I think so anyway. So, and then I've got another Avengers annual, and this has got the lesser popular Tara King. Yeah, Tara King would not have been my favourite Avengers girl, but I give her a due. She did warm. I did warm to her after a while. She was a lot more. What's the word? She was quite coquettish. Is that the word? And she was always making cow eyes at Steed, but she was all right. And then I've got a Lady Penelope annual, and I remember donkeys years ago, it's always years ago with me, isn't it, but I was actually on holiday with my aunt and my cousin Paul, and somewhere at the seaside, and we were on a coach trip, and I saw this in a shop, and I ummed and ahed and walked off, and then at the last minute me and my cousin said, nah, we've got to go back and get it. So we nearly missed a coach back home because I was running in to get the Lady Penelope magazine and Lady Penelope annual, and it's great. It's from the 60s, and I mean, just look at the features in there. You know, real 60s look about it, and it's got Parker. Parker looks like he's come into some trouble. He's kind of in a hospital bed. He's probably still going, yes, lady. And lastly, I've got an annual here, and this isn't really anything to do with comics at all. But the only reason I'm showing this is because I had this from... This is actually dated 1968, and I would have been about, I'm trying to calculate, I would have been about 5 years old, and I don't know why. I think this was my brother's actually originally, but I coveted it, and it's been mine ever since. And I read and read this. Look at the state of it. I read and read this to death, and it just fascinated me. It was all about treasure and pirates, and I just absolutely loved it. God knows why. You can see I wasn't really into girly stuff, and it had little features on pirates. You've got Long John Silver with his parrot, and I always remember I loved this picture. Now you have to bear with me, I would have been a very, very young child at the time, but I loved Captain Blood, and I remember thinking I wanted to marry him. Thank God I grew out of that. And there's another one, Captain Kidd, Blackbeard. So I'm just showing you that purely because it just brings back so many good memories, and the fact that I absolutely adored this annual. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching this little part 2 of my little look at my comic books, annuals and whatnot, and thank you very, very much for watching and bearing with me. Bye.